Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the wild 200-year evolution of the Greene King Brewery. We're going to take a close look at its highly complex historical roots, how it experienced phenomenal growth to become a true industry titan, and its monumental fight for survival during the unprecedented disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic.
To see exactly how this legacy business survived such an incredible modern crisis, we'll be following a quick roadmap today. We'll start with their complex brewing history, look at the modern pub empire they built, what happened when the pandemic struck, how they navigated the crisis, and finally, the massive financial toll. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. A complex brewing history. And honestly, this story literally starts way back in 1086 in Bury St. Edmunds, with monks brewing ale from chalk wells. And get this, those exact same wells are incredibly still in use today. Now, taking an impartial look at the company's founder, Benjamin Greene, we uncover a really complex thread. It stretches all the way from the Westgate Brewery's origins in 1799 and his 1806 venture with William Buck, right up to a 2020 corporate reckoning. You see, the modern company recently announced they'd be paying reparations to BAME charities.
The historical records show exactly why. Greene was a supporter of slavery who owned plantations in the British West Indies. Following the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833, he was awarded over £4,000 in compensation for 231 enslaved people on his estates in Montserrat and St. Kitts. It's a striking historical reality, and it's something the modern corporation has had to formally address.
All right, moving on to Chapter 2, the modern pub empire. If we fast forward to the 21st century, that single local brewery had exploded into a massive national footprint.
Just look at the sheer scale of their managed division alone. It grew to encompass an incredible 1,668 pubs, all operated directly by Greene King. This became the absolute core engine of their revenue, bringing in massive sales through food, drinks, and even accommodation all across the UK.
But they didn't stop there. Alongside those managed properties, they built up a seriously high-quality estate of nearly 1,000 tenanted and leased pubs. These had a much stronger drinks-led bias, which provided really stable cash flow. When you put that together with their brewing and brands division, you've got a highly integrated, self-sustaining ecosystem. It's like a giant hospitality machine. Yet, even with this massive corporate scale, they still held on to some amazing, unique local heritage sites. Take the Nutshell, for example. Operating since 1867, it proudly holds the Guinness record as Britain's smallest pub. It's literally just 15 by 7 feet. You practically have to step outside just to change your mind in there. But it's a brilliant nod to their traditional roots.
Which brings us to Chapter 3, the pandemic strikes. Because the crucial point here is that this steady 200-year growth trajectory came to a devastating, screeching halt in early 2020.
The entire eating and drinking out market practically vanished overnight. Over just a 36-week period in 2020, Greene King pubs were forced into total closure for 14 full weeks. That's 14 weeks of locked doors due to strict government lockdowns, which, as you can imagine, completely cut off their primary source of income.
And you know, the nightmare didn't end when the lockdowns temporarily lifted. Even when they were legally allowed to open, the business faced these incredibly severe operational hurdles. We're talking mandatory 10 p.m. curfews, totally complex and ever-changing regional tier systems, and those notorious rules requiring customers to buy a substantial table meal just to get a pint. It completely upended normal pub culture and heavily depressed their sales. Chapter 4. Navigating the crisis. Faced with a literal existential threat, the company couldn't just sit on its hands. They had to immediately deploy a massive operational pivot to survive.
To protect their workforce while the doors were shut, they tapped into the government's job retention scheme and ended up furloughing a staggering 99% of their team members at various points. But they didn't stop there. They actually topped up salaries to 80% for those above the government cap, and the executive board even took voluntary pay cuts to fund a generous hardship grant for staff facing severe financial struggles.
Operationally, they completely flipped the script. They shifted away from traditional on-premise dining and went all in on digital solutions. They rapidly expanded their takeaway offers to over 1,400 sites. And to minimize contact, they rolled out a new order and pay app to nearly 1,500 locations. Almost overnight, a quarter of all their sales were being processed right through a smartphone, a real game changer.
They also realized they absolutely had to protect their wider ecosystem. For their tenanted pub partners, Greene King threw a vital financial lifeline. They slashed rent by up to 90% during closures and even replaced out-of-date beer and cider completely for free. That was a £27 million investment just to ensure their partners wouldn't go under.
When they finally could reopen their physical doors, they backed it up with a massive £7 million pub safe investment. This was a promise built on safe socializing, minimizing contact, strict hand sanitizing, and even dedicated pub-safe monitors. It was a monumental logistical undertaking just to be able to legally and safely pour a pint.
Finally, Chapter 5, the financial toll. Because despite all that government support and those incredibly agile business pivots, the financial reality of the pandemic was just staggering. Let's be real, no amount of takeaway food can replace a packed British pub.
The corporate financial report for the 36 weeks ending January 2021 laid it all bare. They reported a massive statutory loss before tax of £248.6 million. Group revenue overall plummeted by over 70%.
And the breakdown perfectly illustrates how universal the impact was. The lockdowns spared absolutely no one. The managed division dropped 71%. The tenanted division took the sharpest hit with a massive 74% plunge. Even brewing and brands saw revenues fall by 64% when the crucial cask ale market collapsed.
Yet despite these brutal numbers, this isn't a story of defeat. As their financial report clearly points out, their robust capital structure, which includes a property portfolio valued at £4.3 billion, combined with 200 years of foundational resilience, left them totally poised to rebound. They declare themselves well and truly ready to reopen and play a huge part in kickstarting the UK economy.
Which leaves us to ponder something really fascinating. As the dust finally settles on this historic disruption, how will a legacy brand, one with roots stretching all the way back to 11th century monks, continue to evolve? With digital ordering and new consumer habits now permanently baked in, how will this 200-year-old brewery adapt to the totally new normal of the hospitality industry? Thanks for joining this Explainer. We'll see you next time.